Hello and welcome to the 65th episode of the PEMPodcast Psychic Eye Mystery Podcast. I'm your host, Victoria Laurie, with my noisy bird in the background and my fabulous, schmabulous co-host, Sandy, my sister, my partner in egg-throwing crimes.
Well, why are you bringing that up? Well, let us share with the audience why you're bringing that up.
So like last week we were having just a conversation about the podcast and about, the various ways these killers are, killing people. And I said, okay, so cards on the table. If you had to kill someone, what weapon would you choose? And Sandy goes, I would kill myself before I had to kill other people. And I'm true. Like, my response is, how many weapons do I get to choose from? How long can the sword be? Can I use spikes? Throwing stars.
So I chose eggs.
Flamethrower? Like, what do I get here?
Yeah.
What are my options?
I'm like,
Sandy's, kumbaya. And I'm like, so like, did we come from the same family?
We did not.
Yeah, because I'm like, if someone's out to murder me or my family, I am down with it. I am down with your demise, right?
Yes.
But you're like,
I'd be like, yeah,
with an egg.
With an egg. This will work.
That would miss. That would miss.
Right. I have a dozen.
Oh my God, hilarious.
Well, maybe he would slip and fall and then, knock himself out.
Yes, that would totally happen. The odds of that happening are just astronomical, in your favor. Astronomically high in your favor. Let me throw this banana peel on the floor. Hello, murderer rapist. Here's a banana peel.
All right. Not to encourage you.
I was going to murder and rape you, but now I'm on the floor.
All right. This is not to encourage anyone to
Do you need help getting up?
Okay. I have a vicious dog. I have men in my house.
A vicious dog.
Please do not consider.
Pig,
okay, do not.
A dog the size of a guinea pig.
You're not helping me. All right. Let's change subject, shall we?
Oh,
yes.
God. Thank God your sons live with you, honey. I'd be worried about you.
I have men in the house.
Yes. Big, strong, strapping men. I have a noisy parrot. It sounds like a human.
That's true.
Yeah,
good deterrent.
Constant screeching in the background. So of course, someone would come by my door and be like, pass. On they go. So years ago, when I was living in Texas, I was living in a neighborhood that was brand new. It's like 150 homes, and all of the homes were brand new. And it was next to kind of a little bit of a sketchy part of town. So we were hit constantly with daytime robberies. And my next door neighbor almost had her house broken into. I saw two people standing outside of the house and went outside and confronted them. And I said, what are you doing here? And it was a man and a woman. And the woman said, oh, I'm looking for Annette. And I'm like, you know that Annette doesn't live there, right? And so they start kind of walking away, right? And I'm chasing after them. And I'm literally in fuzzy slippers. So then I start yelling and chasing them, and I'm like, and you tell all your robber friends not to come back here, and just screaming this, right? So they couldn't get away fast enough. I call the police show up. I tell the police officer what happened, and he's trying to suppress laughter because he sees me in my little furry slippers, right? And he's like, that's dangerous. You don't confront, people who are trying to break into a house. I'm like, sir, with all due respect, nobody fucks with crazy.
It's true.
Nobody fucks with crazy.
It's true. Yeah. And fuzzy slippers really kind of complete the image.
Exactly. So, I mean, it completed the look, right?
Did. Yeah.
So
Mrs. Kravitz
her house
and her
was
fuzzy slippers.
saved.
Yes,
by the neighbor with the crazy lady with the fuzzy slippers. So.
Mrs. Kravitz Part 2.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. All right. So let's get to it. So I have a great anecdote this week. I had so many fantastic readings the past 10 days. Like, they've just been really clear, great clients, very open with their energy. It's just been wonderful. So I was reading for a woman who watches the podcast. So if you're out there, you're going to know who you are. So hello. And she had asked about an old love of hers who had passed away. And, getting someone who's not related to you into sort of the room, the lobby, okay, where the dead people come, is tricky. Because sometimes they're motivated to come through and sometimes they're not. They're more motivated if they're related to you, right? Because it's all familial over there. So family hierarchies are key. So anyway, so I reached out to this guy, and I felt him a little faintly, but he comes in and he shows me a soccer ball. And we had already discussed that this woman had a son. And I said, does your son play soccer? And she starts laughing. She said, well, we tried to get him into soccer, but he just ended up crying. He's 5 years old. And I said, okay, well, this gentleman is showing me a soccer ball. And she's like trying to pull more out of me, right? And I'm like, I can't tell you what I'm not seeing. I can only tell you what I'm seeing. So the gentleman on the other side starts expanding the view. And I said, okay, so he's showing me a soccer ball, and he's showing me an athletic field, and then he's showing me a scoreboard, and the score is 2-2. And I said, that's important for some reason. And she smiles. And I said, does that mean something to you? And she said, my son was born February 2nd. So the soccer ball I knew there was a connection to her son. And I was like, maybe he was watching this kid trying to play soccer and crying and, was interested in it. And then she had mentioned his mom. And I said, because he showed me a necklace with his photo on the necklace. So it was almost like a photo on that's lasered onto metal, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what he showed me. And I said, does his mom wear his face around her neck? So bad that I'm laughing at this, but he turned it into a joke. So his mother had some of his ashes put into like a crystal and wears that around her neck. But he translated it as, mom has my face around her neck. I'm like, well, it's better than your ass. Honey.
Yeah,
that's
right.
Than your ass,
my giant big toe is
yes,
on her
exactly.
neck.
That's my hand. Middle finger. No, I'm kidding. So he was honored by that, but he was also kind of poking fun at it a little bit because there's no attachment to their bodies at all. Once you leave, you leave. That was just a vehicle to get you around while you're down here. But I thought it was really cool. And then he had mentioned that his mom talks to him kind of constantly, especially in places of worship. And from what I understand, she is Catholic and she regularly goes to church and chats at him. So it was just a lovely visit from this guy. I just really love the scoreboard thing, 2-2. Yeah. Mention the sun. So I thought that was really cool.
Well, I also love that he's hearing people talking to him. I mean, it's us mortals choosing where we want to have that conversation, but he's listening, which I think is kind of cool.
I think it's lovely. I think it's absolutely lovely that they can hear everything that we say to them. It's just that we have a hard time hearing them because they don't communicate in the way that you and I communicate. It's really a telepathic imprint of all sorts of stuff. So if you couldn't speak, but you could telepathically project a message, that's how communication travels from the other side. So I love the stories when they're like, I go to the cemetery to visit so-and-so. And I'm like, well, they follow you to the cemetery.
Yeah, right.
They're like, oh, okay. All right. We're here where all the other graves are.
Like I said, cool. No, but I think it's where you choose to have that conversation. And I think we need to find that connection, that point where we think there's a connection.
For us, it needs to be tactile. Yeah. There has to be something where the last remnants of that soul, that special person, we can touch it, see it, go there, be near it, all of that stuff.
Sorry, go ahead.
They're not at the cemetery.
Yeah.
They're hanging around you.
Yes, hopefully. Well, I had a really interesting experience. I went for a very long walk. I ended up at the ocean, and it was such a beautiful day. And I stood on the sand and I the sun was beaming, cloudless sky. I could see Martha's Vineyard from where I was standing. And
Wow.
I sent up a prayer to Archangel Michael because I believe he wants to protect me.
Of course he does.
And then I sent a prayer up to a special friend of mine. And I turned around and I started heading back. It was a 4-mile walk. So I was turning around, heading back, and I was fiddling with my phone because I wanted to change my music. And so I'm looking down, and all of a sudden, as I'm walking slowly, I walked right through the scent of my friend, who had a very distinct cologne, right? that he wore.
Yeah.
And
you used to talk about his cologne all the time, how good it smelled.
It was on him and his chemistry. It was just
I think because
distinct.
you told him that, he would bathe in it before you two got together for your meetings. Like, I have a feeling like,
but anyway,
just like shower in it. Do I smell good?
Okay, you're taking away from the story. I walked.
I'm sorry.
I smelled his cologne, and I stopped dead in my tracks. And I look around. I'm like, is anybody doing laundry? Like, did I really smell that? And I retraced my steps, and it was a dirt road. Like, it's not like anybody would have been around. And I thought that was really cool because it was a confirmation that he had heard my prayer. So
for sure. Yeah, absolutely. They love, if there's a distinct smell, usually it's not even, honestly, I wanted to say perfumey. They will waft that around you, but like they do cigarette smoke. They do, cigar smoke is a big one. That's just nasty. Cigarette smoke, cigar smoke, pipe smoke. They'll do cologne, they'll do perfume. So that when I go first, because I'm going to go first, you'll know when I'm around, right? Because you'll be like, that smells like Joe Malone. So Joe Malone makes the best cologne. I absolutely love it. And there's an Earl Grey and cucumber scent that is out of this world. I bathe in it.
Yes, that is.
I was actually at the library stands last week, and I'm typing. I'm trying to finish this manuscript. I'm hoping I'm going to finish it this week. And I'm like typing furiously, and this woman comes into the area where I am, and she comes like over to me, and she goes, and I was like startled. Like, what is happening? And she goes, "You smell amazing."
Break out in a cold sweat, really?
Right? Like hello. So I had to look it up for her. She was like, "What is that? Write that down." So I did. It's Joe Malone. If anybody wants a really, really beautiful, light, citrusy kind of scent, Joe Malone, Earl Grey and cucumber. It's to die for. It's so great. Okay. Spellbound. Sandy loves this book.
I do.
So Spellbound is interesting. It's my first stab at urban fantasy, and it had been an idea that percolated in my mind for, I don't know, a couple of years. Like, I think I came up with the idea in 2012, honestly, and it took until 2019, 2020 to start writing it, somewhere around in there. Sandy helped with this book tremendously. She was my eagle eye on it. It's packed. It's packed with action and stuff going on.
It's a really cool concept. Really,
Thank you.
I loved the book. I've read it, I think, 8 times at this point because I was helping you edit it.
Yeah, 6 of which I'm like, edits. Please read this again and find more typos.
Yes, but it's
6 were forced.
But it's a really fun, thrilling experience to read. Really cool. Really cool. I can't wait for the next book. And I know you hate it when people say that. Like, when are you going to write the next book? But
no, I don't. I don't hate it when people say that. I hate it when people go write faster, because I literally am typing as fast as I can.
Yes.
So it's just, and I get that they won't mean that as a compliment. I absolutely do. It's just
pressure
when you're, yeah, exactly. So no, I don't. I love it when you say, I can't wait for the next one.
Okay,
that is motivation to finish what I'm writing and get to the next one.
Excellent.
So this book, I'm actually doing a new series with my publisher, the same publisher, Kensington Press, that publishes the Cactilia Mysteries. They've asked for a new series. So I'm doing a spinoff of this world for that one. And that first book is going to be called Trinket for the Taking. And I think that's going to come out in about a year and a half, somewhere around in there. A Spell to Unbind basically is the story of a woman who is cursed with a spell, and when you become in this world, when you become cursed with a spell, you are given kind of supernatural powers. So you in turn can start casting spells, and you can imbue everyday objects with certain magical properties. So those are called trinkets. So in this urban fantasy, the more powerful trinkets are up for grabs. So Esme Belarus is the main character, and she is interviewing for a job as a thief to one of the most powerful spellcasters out there. So and she's, thwarted at every turn. There's something always in her way. I did that on purpose because I just kept thinking about something I heard or read, which was, when you can feel anxiety getting a hold of you because you feel like so many things are out of control, solve the problem in front of you. So just solve the problem in front of you and then solve the next problem in front of you, right? Take it one problem at a time. And so that was sort of the ladder that I built the entire story around. So Esme kept having problems thrown at her that she had to solve kind of one at a time because they were all interwoven and linked.
But the other aspect to this book is it is also a murder mystery, a rather gory murder mystery. So gird your loins, people, if you decide to read the book. There are no eggs involved. Well, actually,
no eggs involved. Yeah,
there is an egg involved.
Actually, the murder scene.
There's an egg involved.
Yes, there is. There is a Fabergé egg. Yes, there is. So, but the murder scene was told to me by a fellow psychic who did crime scene investigations. And one of the scenes that she visited was the mafia getting even. And it was a dinner party. They interrupted a dinner party. And the only person that lived through it was the baby. So,
yeah, but that's not what happens in this book.
Yeah, no, there's no babies involved in this book. No babies were harmed in the making of this book.
Exactly. So, but it's a really compelling read, a very fun ride, very plausible, even though it is fantasy. So I highly recommend it. Highly.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So I wanted to update everyone on some cases that we've covered that have recently become very newsworthy. Hopefully you've heard in the news that we covered in our Psychic Eye Mysteries podcast, episode 61, the murder of rapper Tupac Shakur. And according to the Associated Press, Dwayne Keefe D. Davis was arrested and charged with the murder for ordering the 1996 killing of Tupac. The September 29th arrest marked the long-awaited breakthrough in one of hip-hop's most enduring mysteries. And while Davis isn't necessarily accused of being the gunman, he is described as the group's ringleader. And in Nevada, where the arrest was made, a person can be charged with a crime, including murder, if they help someone commit that crime. So authorities believe that Davis orchestrated the plan that was carried out by the group of individuals, all of whom are now believed to be deceased, with the exception of Davis. He himself has admitted in interviews and in his 2019 tell-all memoir, Compton Street Legend, that he provided the gun used in the drive-by shooting, and he made these public statements as a result of his presumption that he had immunity, which he actually did not have immunity for his role in Tupac's murder. So the Nevada grand jury indicted him on one count of murder with a deadly weapon, plus a charge for gang activity, which could add up to 20 years of additional time if he's convicted. And he's due in court, I think, if not this week, then next week. So that's a case unfolding as we speak. Also, our PEMPodcast episode 64, the case around Suzanne Morphew, the case we just did, who vanished on Mother's Day, according to CNN. On Thursday, September 28th, Colorado authorities announced that they had found the remains of Suzanne Morphew, and her remains were discovered about 50 miles south from where she had been reported missing. Investigators came across her remains because they were searching the area for an investigation that was completely unrelated. So they basically stumbled upon her remains. Her husband, Barry Morphew, has faced first-degree murder charges in 2021 in connection with his wife's disappearance, but the trial, which was due to start in April of 2022, was dismissed because prosecutors indicated that they were not prepared for trial at that point. And so the case was dismissed without prejudice, meaning that they can bring the case against him. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he can be retried. So that case is under an active investigation. And then in our Psychic Eye Mysteries episode 62, where we covered the Titanic and some other Hollywood stories, there's actually 2 updates from that episode. The Hollywood writer's strike. According to the Associated Press, the strike was declared over after 5 long months. It was ended on September 26th. And board members from the Writers Union approved a contract agreement with the studios. So everybody's headed back to work. The problem is that actors are still on strike, and a lot of writers are saying that they're standing in unity with their fellow actors. So several writers are now free to start writing again as of midnight, September 27th. So you've seen some late night talk shows go back to work. But it remains to be seen kind of what's going to happen with SAG-AFTRA. And I didn't know if you had any comments you wanted to share about this particular story.
Well, originally I had said it would be May before everything was the dust was all settled and people would get back to work. It's interesting that the strike was settled after five months, May 5, I still say that this is going to drag on, I think, into the holidays. And then I know that October 1st was like a big deadline because they needed to have everybody back to work and working in order to get shows out by like December. And then they usually, after the holidays, they would take like a hiatus until February, something like that.
Typically, yeah.
Yeah. So it has really upended everybody's schedule. So it really might be kind of May before we start seeing some of these shows come back on. I love that the writers pretty much got everything that they asked for. I love that. I'm just like over the moon for these guys because they are so underpaid and just abused, just kind of honestly abused. So, let's hope that the Actors Guild wins as well. And it's this whole AI angle, which I really want them to stand firm on because it's going to eventually affect my work as well. Yeah. So,
yeah. Fabulous. Well, at least we can start to tune into some late night fun. And then the other case that we covered in that episode 62 was Michael Oher. And according to Entertainment Tonight, on September 29th, his conservatorship was officially terminated. And despite that termination, his lawsuit regarding the potential royalties due to him from earnings by the Tuohys based off of his name is ongoing. So the Tuohys are next obligated to provide all of their financial records that kind of outline everything that's occurred financially since they became connected to Michael Oher. And we'll see what comes of that case that's going to continue to unfold. So if you're at all interested in hearing about these cases in detail, please tune in to episode 61, 64, or
all of them,
or 62. For sure.
Please tune into episode 1, then episode 2, then episode 3, then episode 4.
All right. So speaking of which, tuning in, I wanted to just ask before we jumped into today's case that if you are a fan, I and Victoria, both of us, we would greatly appreciate you sharing links with your friends, people that you think might enjoy the podcast, help us grow our audience base. It would mean a tremendous amount to us if we could expand our audience. So if you guys can help us out, that'd be amazing. Really appreciate it.
That really would. It really would. So subscribe, hit the like button, pass the link on. I know that's work. And it is work, because then you have to think of like, well, who do I know that might like this podcast? But that's how my books have gone. It's been pretty much word of mouth because, as you know, Sandy, I just don't market myself. I know, but I'm going to start any minute now. So passing the word on would be just absolutely really, really appreciated. And thank you to all of you who continually tune in. Really, really appreciate your support. So.
Yes, for sure. All right. So we have kind of wily case that actually is going to cover both today and our next podcast. And it surrounds the story about the Long Island serial killer, who is considered to be the perpetrator of a series of 11 murders over the span of 15 years between 1996 and 2011. Most of the known victims were sex workers, many of whom had advertised their services on Craigslist. And due to their remains being discovered in Gilgo Beach along the South Shore of Long Island, New York, these cases also have now become known as the Gilgo Beach murders. The first discovery of human remains was made by the side of Ocean Parkway in Oak Beach on December 11th, 2010. The investigation was prompted by a search for a missing 24-year-old woman, Shannon Gilbert, who had disappeared in the area 8 months earlier in May 2010 after fleeing from a client's home and making a 23-minute-long 911 emergency call, stating that they are trying to kill me. A month after Shannon's disappearance, the Suffolk County Police Department's Missing Persons Bureau assigned Officer John Malia to search for Shannon with his trained cadaver dog, a German Shepherd named Blue. Over the course of the summer of 2010, Officer Malia and Blue searched the gated Oak Beach community where Shannon had last been seen, but they were unable to turn up any leads. All that changed on December 11th, 2010, when Officer Malia and Blue began yet another search, this time along the shoulder of Ocean Parkway, because according to the FBI, dump bodies were frequently found close to roadways. So despite the thick vegetation and a light layer of snow, Blue alerted to a scent, which the pair tracked to a disintegrating burlap bag containing a skeleton. The remains were later identified as Melissa Barthelemy. While searching the scene for further evidence, police discovered 3 additional bodies, all wrapped in burlap and within approximately 500 feet of one another. These 3 additional victims were identified as Maureen Brainard, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. These 4 victims were subsequently dubbed the Gilgo Four. The first of the Gilgo Four victims was 24-year-old Melissa Barthelemy, who was reported missing on July 12, 2009. The petite 4'10", 95-pound young woman had been living in the Bronx and worked as a sex worker through Craigslist postings. On the night she disappeared, investigators know that she met with a client, deposited $900 into her bank account, and attempted to call her old boyfriend, but the call did not go through. A week after she vanished, and for 5 weeks thereafter, Melissa's teenage sister, Amanda, received a total of 8 vulgar, mocking, and insulting calls from Melissa's cell phone by a man who, among other things, asked Amanda if she was a whore like her sister. The calls became increasingly disturbing and eventually culminated with the caller claiming that Melissa was dead and that he was going to watch her rot. Investigators suspected that the caller may have been Melissa's killer and were unable to trace some of the calls to they were able to trace some of the calls to a handful of busy locations in Midtown Manhattan, near the Port Authority, the Empire State Building, Times Square, and Madison Square Garden, as well as to Massapequa, Long Island, but they were unable to pinpoint who was actually placing these calls. The second victim recovered on December 11th was Maureen Brainard Barnes, who was also a petite 4'11", 105-pound, 25-year-old mother of 2, who was living paycheck to paycheck in Norwich, Connecticut. To help pay the mortgage on her home after receiving an eviction notice, Maureen returned to earning money as a sex worker by securing her clients through Craigslist and frequenting a Super 8 motel in Manhattan. On July 9, 2007, Maureen made plans to spend the day in New York City and told a friend that she was planning on meeting a client outside of the motel, but she never returned home. Maureen's family filed a missing persons report, but when the police refused to take her case seriously, her sister, brother-in-law, and brother rode their motorcycles into Manhattan to search for her, but they were unable to turn up any information. Shortly after her disappearance, Maureen's friend, Sarah Carnes, received a phone call from a man on an unfamiliar number. The man claimed that he had just seen Maureen alive and well and living in a whorehouse in Queens. The man refused to identify himself and could not tell Sarah the location of the supposed brothel. After telling Sarah that he would call back with the address, he ended the call, and not surprisingly, he never made contact again. Maureen's body was found on Gilgo Beach 3.5 years after she disappeared. The third victim, discovered on Gilgo Beach in December of 2010, was 22-year-old Megan Waterman, a mother of a 4-year-old daughter, and she resided in South Portland, Maine. Like the other victims, Megan advertised on Craigslist as an escort, and on June 6, 2010, she disappeared from a Holiday Inn Express in Hopog, Long Island, 15 miles northeast of Gilgo Beach. The day before she vanished, Megan told her 20-year-old boyfriend that she was going out and would call him later. The 5'5" young woman's remains were discovered 6 months following her disappearance. 27-year-old Amber Costello, a sex worker and known heroin user, went missing on September 2nd, 2010 from her West Babylon, New York home, which was 10 miles north of Gilgo Beach. On that September evening, Amber left the house to meet a stranger who had called her several times and offered her $1,500 for her services, 6 times the usual rate. After refusing to meet her client at the Hauppauge Holiday Inn Express, which was the same hotel that Megan Waterman disappeared from, and yet unable to turn that kind of a payday down, Amber finally agreed to go to her client's location, which was an unusual thing for her to do. Sadly, Amber was not immediately reported as missing because her family thought that she was recovering in a residential drug rehab center and therefore couldn't respond to messages and phone calls. Like the other victims discovered along Gilgo Beach, Amber was a 4'11", 4 feet 11 and weighed approximately 100 pounds. Between March 29th and April 4th, 2011, 4 more sets of remains were discovered in another area along Ocean Parkway near Oak Beach and Gilgo Beach. These newly discovered victims were to the east within 2 miles of the December 2010 Gilgo Four discovery. Police concluded that all these victims predated the Gilgo Four murders. The first set of human remains discovered on March 29th included a skull, a pair of hands, and a forearm, which belonged to 20-year-old Jessica Taylor. Jessica went missing on July 21st, 2003, and like her fellow victims, she worked in Washington, D.C. and Manhattan as a sex worker. She was last seen between July 18th and July 22nd, 2003, working around the Manhattan Port Authority bus terminal. On July 26, 2003, which was 5 days after she had disappeared, her naked and dismembered torso was discovered atop a scrap wood pile at the end of a paved access road off of Halsey Manor Road in Manorville, a Long Island town 45 miles east of Gilgo Beach. A tattoo on her body had been mutilated with a sharp instrument. On April 4th, 2011, another set of partial remains, a skull, right foot, and hands, were unearthed on Gilgo Beach. The right foot had been cut off high above the ankle, possibly to conceal an identifying mark or tattoo. On May 28, 2020, using DNA technology, police determined that the partial remains belonged to Valerie Mack, who also went by the name Melissa Taylor. She had been living in Philadelphia and working as an escort when she went missing in 2000. Her family reported that Valerie had last been seen in the spring or summer of 2000 in the area of Port Republic, New Jersey. Similarly to the other Gilgo Beach victims, Valerie was small in stature, approximately 5 feet tall, and weighed 100 pounds. Like Jessica Taylor, Valerie Mack's torso was discovered in Manorville on November 19, 2000, wrapped in a garbage bag and dumped in the woods near the intersection of Halsey Manor Road and Mill Road near a power line access road. Because the dismembered remains of Valerie Mack and Jessica Taylor were both disposed of in a similar manner and in the same parts of Manorville and Gilgo Beach, police suspected their murders were committed by the same person. Also, during the April 4th, 2011 police search of Gilgo Beach, 2 unidentified victims were recovered. Police located a skull inside a plastic bag discarded near Jones Beach State Park, and DNA testing revealed that the remains belonged to an unidentified young African-American woman whose dismembered torso was discovered at Hempstead Lake State Park in Lakeview, New York on June 28, 1997. Her body was found in a plastic Rubbermaid container, which was dumped next to a road along the west side of the lake. Authorities dubbed the victim Peaches because she had a tattoo on her left breast of a heart-shaped peach with a bite out of it and 2 drips falling from its core. Also uncovered during the April 4th, 2011 search, about 250 feet from the remains of Valerie Mack, was the skeleton of a female toddler aged between 16 and 24 months. The little girl's body was wrapped in a blanket and showed no visible signs of trauma. DNA tests later determined that the toddler, who was wearing gold earrings and a necklace, was the daughter of Peaches, whose body was found 10 miles east near Jones Beach State Park. The true identity of these 2 victims remains a mystery. Suffolk police subsequently expanded the search area up to the Nassau County border looking for more victims, and on April 11, 2011, investigators found 2 more sets of remains about a mile apart and approximately 5 miles west of the Gilgo Four location. On Tobay Beach, police recovered a skull and several teeth, which were determined through DNA testing to belong to 34-year-old Karen Vertega, who disappeared in 1996 while working as a sex worker. 15 years earlier, Karen's severed legs were found in a garbage bag on Fire Island on April 20th, 1996. Karen was also known to authorities as Fire Island Jane Doe until DNA testing in 2023 revealed her identity. The other body unearthed on April 11, 2011 was that of a young Asian male who died from blunt force trauma to the head. The victim, discovered very close to the bodies of the Gilgo Four, was between 17 and 23 years of age and 5 feet 6 inches tall. He was dressed in women's clothing and may have been a transgender woman. Authorities estimate the victim may have been dead between 5 and 10 years, and that the identity of that victim is unknown. Almost a year after the Gilgo Four were discovered, the remains of Shannon Gilbert, the missing woman who prompted the Gilgo Beach murder investigation, were finally recovered. However, police do not believe Shannon was a victim of the Long Island serial killer. Her cause of death remains contested, with police claiming that it was an accidental drowning, while an independent autopsy determined possible strangulation. We will dive into Shannon's case next week in next week's podcast. There are a couple of suspects that have been named in these series of murders. On January 16, 2020, Suffolk County Police Commissioner Geraldine Hart released images of a belt found during the initial investigation near Ocean Parkway in Gilgo Beach, with the letters HM or WH, depending on which way you oriented the belt, which were embossed in black letter. Police believe that the belt was handled by the perpetrator and that it did not belong to any of the victims. On July 13, 2023, 59-year-old architect Rex Howerman, a resident of Massapequa Park in Long Island, was arrested in Midtown Manhattan outside of his office, RH Consulting and Associates, and he was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of second-degree murder in the deaths of the 3 of the Gilgo Four victims, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. He was also named as a prime suspect in the murder of the 4th of the Gilgo Four, Maureen Brainard Barnes. The investigation into Maureen's murder is ongoing. He pled not guilty at his arraignment and remains in police custody. A pretrial hearing is scheduled for the end of September 2023. Howerman's attorney, Michael J. Brown, has maintained that the case against his client is largely circumstantial. He told the media the only thing he did say as he was in tears was, "I didn't do this." He's distraught. He's clearly distraught about these charges. The Suffolk County District Attorney Raymond Tierney countered that the 13-year investigation into the evidence against Rex Howerman includes 2,500 pages of documents, crime scene photographs, autopsy reports, and hundreds of hours of video footage taken at his Massapequa Park home and New York City office. Further, Howerman came to be known to the Gilgo Beach Task Force in March of 2022, and from there, a secret grand jury was utilized to secure more than 300 subpoenas and search warrants. Tierney also confirmed that the Gilgo Four crime scenes had commonalities. The victims were bound at the head, midsection, and legs by camouflage burlap. Authorities believe Howerman contacted his victims using burner phones, which were then discarded shortly after he killed each victim. The burner phones were tracked to Massapequa, which placed the user of the phones in that area during the time of the slayings. He was also linked to one of the cell phones on a surveillance video that showed him purchasing additional minutes for the device at a store in Midtown Manhattan. Additional key evidence includes a witness reported seeing a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche pull up to Amber Costello's West Babylon, Long Island home around the time she was last seen on September 2nd, 2010. The same type of pickup truck down to the make and early model was later determined to be registered to Howerman. According to court documents, Howerman conducted more than 200 online searches between March 2022 and June 2023, including, quote, why could law enforcement not trace the calls made by the Long Island serial killer, unsolved serial killer cases, Inside the Long Island Serial Killer, and Gilgo Beach, as well as the names of Maureen Brainard Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, and Megan Waterman. He also searched for podcasts and documentaries relating to the mystery and reviewed hundreds of online photos of his alleged victims and their families. DNA taken from the discarded pizza also allegedly tied Howerman to a male hair fiber that was found on the burlap material used to wrap Megan Waterman. Additionally, hair belonging to a female was found on or near the three of the victims, and it was later determined that that hair fiber belonged to Howerman's wife, Asa Ellerup. Asa, who was out of state during the times Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello disappeared, led investigators to conclude that the burlap tape, vehicles, and other instrumentalities used in the furtherance of these murders came from the defendant Howerman's residence, where his wife also resides, or was transferred from his clothing. The ramshackle Massapequa home that Howerman shared with his wife Asa His stepson, Christopher Sheridan, and his daughter, Victoria, was overrun by authorities armed with a search warrant on the day of Howerman's arrest. While the police are not releasing any information about what items recovered from the Howerman home, they have stated that they recovered a cache of more than 200 guns in a vault inside the home. Investigators are still trying to determine whether the weapons belong to Rex Howerman, are legally registered as he's only been issued 92 gun permits. Shortly after being charged as a suspect in the Gilgo Four murders, Asa Ellerup, Howerman's wife of more than 25 years, retained counsel and promptly filed for divorce. John Bitteroff. In July of 2017, 57-year-old John Bitteroff was sentenced to serve 50 years to life in prison for a second-degree murder of Rita Tancredi and Colleen McNamee. He is also a suspect in the murder of a third woman, Sandra Casilla. Sandra's body was discovered on November 20th, 1993. Rita Tancredi, a known sex worker, was last seen hitchhiking along Montauk Highway east of County Road 101 in Suffolk County, New York on November 1st, 1993. She was found dead the next day in a wooded area off Esplanade Drive in East Patchogue. She had been beaten and strangled, and her naked body was found in a unique pose. 20-year-old Colleen McNamee, also a sex worker, was last seen on January 5th, 1994, getting into a small blue car outside of the Blue Dawn Diner in Islandia, New York. Her body was discovered in the woods near Express Drive South off the William Floyd Parkway in Shirley, New York on January 30th, 1994. Like Rita, she was also found naked and in a unique pose and had been beaten and strangled to death. After Bitteroff's sentence, prosecuting attorney Robert Biancaviglia stated that Bitteroff was also a suspect in at least one of the 10 murders attributed to the Long Island serial killer in New York, Suffolk, and Nassau counties, and that the investigation is ongoing. Authorities are focusing on the cases of Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack, as Bitteroff was a carpenter who lived in Manorville, where the torsos of the two victims were recovered. The remains were roughly 3 miles away from Bitteroff's home. Coincidentally, the daughter of Rita Tancredi was reportedly best friends with Melissa Barthelemy, one of the first victims discovered at Gilgo Beach. Melissa's mother had reported that Melissa had a lot of calls to Manorville from her phone at the time of her disappearance. Sadly, at the time of all these victims' disappearances, most of these women were reduced to a single dimension by their profession as prostitutes, which made the police reluctant to take their cases seriously and look for these victims when they vanished. Only when a number of bodies were recovered along the remote area of Gilgo Beach did investigators recognize they had a big problem. It wasn't until December of 2015 that the FBI actually became involved in the investigation. And their delayed participation was due to Police Chief James Burke, who blocked the FBI from joining the investigation for years. Burke was ultimately indicted for civil rights violations and conspiracy, and in November of 2016, he was sentenced to serve 46 months in federal prison for assault and conspiracy. There are 9 additional people, including Shannon Marie Gilbert, that authorities have yet to determine if, in fact, they were victims of the Long Island serial killer, and we're going to discuss those cases during next week's podcast. My sources for this story include Wikipedia, the Gilgo Beach murders, CBS News 48 Hours, Was Rex Howerman's Wife Sleeping Next to the Long Island Serial Killer by Rich Fetzer, September 17, 2023. NBC News, Gilgo Beach Murders, A Demon That Walks Amongst Us, Charged in Long Island Serial Killings by Jonathan Dienst, Greg Sergel, Tom Winter, and Corky Seismeko, July 14, 2023. NBC News, evidence against Gilgo Beach suspect includes surveillance videos and 2,500 pages of documents, prosecutors say, by Daniela Silva, August 1st, 2023. NBC News, Gilgo suspect has more than 200 guns in his vault at home, police say, by Minnie Vion Burke, July 18, 2023. The New York Post, the most damning evidence linking Rex Howerman to the Gilgo Beach murders, Chevy truck, burner phones, sick Google searches, by Lisa Eustrich, July 14th, 2023. CBS News 48 Hours. 48 Hours uncovers missing escort Shannon Gilbert's final minutes, July 14th, 2023. Wikipedia, John Bitteroff. CBS News, New York. Long Island father on trial in decade-old murders of two prostitutes by Carolyn Gustav, May 3rd, 2017. I'm done talking.
I thought you were doing great. I mean, this was a complicated case with a lot of difficult to pronounce locations and names.
Yes.
And I thought you did an excellent job, Sans.
I hope everybody was able to follow along because it is kind of a wily case.
It really is, because the Long Island serial killer has been attributed to a whole bunch of murders with different modus operandis, different characteristics, some women being dismembered, torsos found, it's it's wily, because I think that the Gilgo Beach area, that area is kind of a dumping ground, easy access. It's a stretch of highway where there are no houses from what I've seen from the aerial map. And I kind of suspect that on the right side of the highway where all of the bodies were found, it can get a little marshy. That's my suspicion.
It is. Yes.
So when we were discussing this case, I was like, well, Rex Howerman is beyond guilty. Like, it's just, and I love kind of how his defense attorney is, well, the case is all circumstantial. Okay, most murders are circumstantial, like most of them, unless the guy's standing over the body with a knife, going like, yep, I did it, and is covered in blood. It's pretty much circumstantial.
Yes.
So that doesn't mean that the defense, or excuse me, the prosecution's case is weak. It's not. So I think when I'm looking at this intuitively, when I'm looking at the case against Rex, intuitively, it's rock solid. Like, they have put a fantastic case together. And even just some of the details that they've been leaking out, I think that there's still more evidence that's like, wow, okay, he totally did this. So I think he's going down. But the interesting thing, you and I were having a conversation, and I used to, for several years, I dated an architect. And one of the things that my old boyfriend wanted to do was he wanted to build on a marsh. There was a lot in the neighborhood where I lived that he wanted to purchase and then, build this, because it was a challenge. So he wanted to build a house basically on a marsh, and he was going to have to account for the level of sinking and sink pylons in, and like, it was this whole thing, right? And he had spent a lot of time doing the math, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So terrain is something that architects absolutely have to take into account. And so when you have an area with specific terrain, like at Gilgo Beach, dumping these bodies in that kind of an environment that was probably on the marshy side, probably. I don't know that for certain, but it's, given the vegetation, it looks like it was somewhat marshy.
Yeah.
And the fact that there are no houses around, that's not an area where you go walking, right?
Yeah. Well, it's also an area it's not going to be developed.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Because of the terrain.
Yeah.
So, and no one's going to complain about the bad smell, because you expect the beach to smell, rotting fish constantly. So it's sort of the perfect area to dump bodies, honestly. And, as awful as that sounds, that's sort of, if you want someone to kind of disappear, that's where you dump the body. It's like in Florida, if you want someone to disappear, you just go to the Everglades, and the crocodiles, or excuse me, the alligators take care of it. So he had this plotted out, but he was obviously, his ego kept getting ahead of him, right? He thought he was much smarter than the police, et cetera, et cetera. So he kept taking these risks by calling relatives of the deceased, and doing the online searches, like everybody knows, go to the library to do that shit. Don't do it from your home,
Can you stop giving people hints on how to get away with murder, please? Thank you.
Sandy, this stuff goes into books. Like, I spent a lot of time thinking about how someone can get away with murder, and then how that person who thinks they've gotten away with murder is ultimately found out. So, like, this is my job. My job is actually literally to think of ways, to devise ways to get away with murder, but not quite. So, so I wouldn't have, if I had written something similar like this and had Rex Howerman as the villain, I certainly wouldn't have him doing so many stupid things. I wouldn't have him searching, at home, online, right? I wouldn't have him calling the victim's family.
Yeah.
Because it's just, my readers would be like, oh, come on, he's not caught, So, Yeah. And even, something that keeps standing out to me is that he was wrapping his victims in the camouflage burlap. So, like I said, architects are kind of preoccupied with terrain because they always want to put a building on the terrain that goes with it.
Yeah.
Otherwise it becomes an eyesore. So the landscape is something that they spend a lot of time considering, And so they're very familiar with shrubbery, landscaping, all of that stuff. And the camouflage burlap just kept coming back to me like that was something specific enough that he specifically wanted to use it because he had been considering it in other projects. Like that just, I don't know if that's true, but that's what my intuition was saying. Like he had thought, oh, I will use that burlap because I've seen it used in this project, and the camouflage makes the burlap kind of disappear. So that's my theory. So he's 100% guilty. I see him going away for the rest of his life. It's just what a horrible human being. 6'5", and he's choosing victims that are 4'11", just so that he could absolutely make sure that he could overpower them. Horrible human being. I really hope that they throw him in jail and throw away the key.
So at the moment, I'm just curious, at the moment he's accused of Melissa, Barthelemy, Maureen,
3, right?
3 out of the 4. Yeah.
I think he did 5. I really think he's responsible for 5. I think there's one more victim. Because I just keep seeing the number 5 associated with his energy in this case.
That hasn't been recovered yet, potentially?
Yeah, that's my thinking.
Okay.
My thinking is that, and I don't know that he dumped the first victim at Gilgo. I have a feeling he dumped the first victim somewhere else, and that there are enough similarities between the two that eventually they'll connect them. But I don't know at that point if there will be enough evidence to try him for, I mean, once he goes to jail forever for these 3 murders, prosecutors are kind of reluctant to charge someone again with murder because trials are very, very expensive. So
True.
if he's already, serving time for life for those 3 murders, they might just say, okay, so we think that he's responsible for this other murder, but I don't know that he'll be tried for all 5. It just doesn't feel like that. It feels like he'll be tried for 3, and that'll be satisfactory. That'll be good enough from a prosecutorial standpoint. The other egregious thing is the police chief, James Burke, who kept the FBI out. And he kept the FBI out not because he had animosity with the FBI, because he didn't want the FBI poking around in his business, which was corrupt.
Yeah.
And then Sandy, I don't know if you know this, but I looked him up, and he has just been charged in a sex ring conspiracy. So he was just charged with a sex crime. So he's back in court, and he'll go back to jail. He's just a shit, just a kind of a shit asshole. As for the other murders, it's just really John Bitroff, I think, is probably responsible for a couple of them. But there's a feeling like the Long Island serial killer is sort of a combination of bodies they've identified as standing out without an obvious culprit, so to speak, right? Not a boyfriend, not a relative, not,
it's all getting lumped into
exactly, something domestic, right? So I kind of think that area has been a good dumping ground because it's fairly remote, yet easy to get to. Not a lot of people are walking around to find shit. And, you can literally, I guess, get away with murder if you dump the bodies there. So next week's case, I can't wait to dive in a little bit deeper into some of these cases to look at the suspects then, because I think that there are multiple killers here. Multiple.
Yeah. So
I think there's at least 3 or 4.
I think John Bitteroff is responsible for Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack's murders.
Yeah.
It fits kind of where he resided. It fits like his motive.
Yep.
So we know about 2, and we know that what I can't quite figure out is Melissa Barthelemy, who is it?
Yeah. So she's the best friends with Melissa Barthelemy, one of the first victims discovered on Gilgo Beach.
Right.
So
Yeah.
was she connected to John Bitteroff, or was she a victim of someone else?
No, I think so Howerman has been charged with Melissa's murder.
Right.
The one that he hasn't been charged with is Maureen Brainard Barnes. So I guess they don't have enough evidence. And if there is a fifth victim, that would make sense that would be the 5, the Gilgo Four plus one more.
Right.
Maybe it's coincidental that Melissa was best friends with a victim of John Bitteroff. I don't know.
Well, they both weren't they both sex workers?
Yes.
So these are very dangerous occupations.
Yeah.
Like exceptionally dangerous, because they're easy targets and the police don't give a fuck. And to your point that they've been reduced to one dimension, that's true. And I just think it's horrible. I just think it's horrible that we reduce women to constantly, we're reduced to, this idea of a shameful profession, when truly these women are just trying to earn money. That's it.
To live, to take
They've
care
been,
of
locked out of other ways to earn money.
Yeah.
And you don't go into sex work like, yay, can't wait to get into sex work because it's so exciting. I can't wait to have a 300-pound sweaty fat man sitting on top of me. Like this is a sort of a last resort.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
We treat them as if they're scum, and they're not. They are victims.
They had families.
Usually.
People had loved them.
Absolutely.
They were, some were mothers. It's heartbreaking.
And the one with the toddler, Peaches,
Peaches,
that really disturbs me. That really upsets me.
So do you think that they'll discover who she is and who?
I do. Honestly, I do think that they, there's a feeling like her name's like right there, but it hasn't been revealed yet. So hopefully with enough attention to the peach tattoo, someone will say, wow, that sounds like so-and-so who disappeared blank. Okay. So the fact that her daughter, was it her daughter? Toddler? Was his daughter? Was
female
found,
toddler, 16 to 24 months here. So under
250
2
feet away.
Yeah.
With no physical signs of trauma. On the one hand, you're like, okay, she didn't suffer a beating or blows or maybe strangulation. On the other hand, did he just dump her and leave her? And did she die of exposure? Like there's no good way to look at that. Just awful.
Yeah.
Awful.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So good news. The Gilgo Four culprit has been caught, is facing life in prison, if not worse. So his life's over. Yeah. John Bitteroff is already in jail.
Good.
And hopefully they will make a stronger case just to bring closure to Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack's murders.
I have a feeling that both of them will be convicted. There isn't a sense that justice won't be served with either one of them.
Okay. Well, that's good. And so, as we said, next week we'll spend time talking about Shannon Marie Gilbert and some of the other outstanding cases relating to people that have been discovered in and around the area of Gilgo Beach.
Right.
But for now, after a very long podcast, yay. Sorry for the delays. We're doing our best. But if you, again, like we asked midpoint, if you can help us grow our audience, we'd be eternally grateful. It would keep us motivated, keep us engaged, keep us dedicated to doing this. Not that that's a threat. It's just, it would be more motivating to us.
Recommend us or we're off. We're out of here.
Get some eggs. But anyway, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please click the like button, share with your friends,
subscribe,
leave us a comment. That's kind comments.
Yeah, I know.
Thoughtful comments would be great.
The haters.
Yeah. And if you'd like to
anyone who says, Victoria, I love your books, but I'm not reading the rest of that. Bye. Delete.
Right. Anyway, if you'd like to learn more about my sister and her books and or her book to book a reading or her Patreon page or her newsletter or I don't know.
All the other stuff that I'm involved in,
Right.
so victorialaureate.com, it's all there. It's just one place where you can find all of the information. So
Absolutely. And,
yay.
you know, please feel free to leave us a comment on Facebook, both on Victoria's fan page as well as the ridiculous page I tried to put up
It's not ridiculous.
for
It's
the
not ridiculous.
podcast.
We're redoing it. We're just, you know, we are both completely overwhelmed with the other responsibilities that we have in our lives going on, which is, I think, what is motivating us to say, hey guys, you know, if you could share and grow the audience, then it really does help us go, okay, this is worth all of the time, effort, and energy away from all of this other stuff that we have as responsibilities. So we're just asking really just to grow the audience. That's really all we're asking. So just keep us in the game, basically. Because I hear from you guys all the time. I read for a lot of you. You're like, I love your podcasts, and that's fantastic. But we need the numbers to kind of start popping. So
Okay. So with that, we will look forward to diving into the second half of this story in our next podcast. In the meantime, thank you so very much for tuning in, for your support, for your efforts on our behalf. We genuinely and greatly appreciate it.
yes, definitely, definitely. All right, Sans, you did a great job as usual. Love you.
Thank you.
Love you lots.
Love you too. Thank you so much for your comments.
You're welcome.
Bye, everyone.